I didn't plan to stop by Elise's house that afternoon. It was supposed to be a quick errand. Drop off a small bag of food, leave it by the door, and head back home before traffic built up. Nothing dramatic. Just a mother doing what she has always done. But the moment I stepped onto her porch, I heard her voice through the door, soft and careful in a way that didn't belong to her. "I understand. Yes, I know," she said. I froze with my hand hovering over the bell. Elise had always spoken with warmth, quick laughter, confident tone, but this voice sounded rehearsed, like she was trying not to trigger something on the other end of the line. The house was quiet except for her words, and something inside me told me not to interrupt yet. "I'll sign it," she said, barely above a whisper. I just need him to stop being angry." The sentence didn't make sense at first. Sign what? And why would signing something calm Adrian down? My stomach tightened as I listened. There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine Veronica's voice filling the silence on the other side of that call. Calm, measured, always polite in public, but heavy with expectation. "Yes, ma'am," Elise added. "Ma'am." My daughter never used that word unless she felt small. I should have pressed the bell then. I should have made noise and let her know I was there. But I stood still because something in her tone felt wrong. Not disagreement, not fear exactly, but submission. Like she was negotiating peace she didn't deserve to have to beg for. "I'll apologize tonight," she said. "I didn't mean for it to look disrespectful." Look disrespectful. And the phrasing bothered me more than the apology itself. Elise had always been honest to a fault. Hearing her frame things like that told me she wasn't speaking from her own truth. She was speaking from someone else's script. The call ended. I heard the soft click of her phone against the counter. Then silence. Thick and heavy, like she was holding herself together by force. I rang the bell once. Footsteps rushed toward the door, quick and uneven. When she opened it, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming." "I was nearby," I said gently, lifting the small bag in my hand. "Thought I'd drop this off." She stepped aside to let me in, and I walked into a house that looked perfect on the surface. Everything in its place. The faint smell of a candle burning somewhere in the living room. But Elise herself looked tense. Shoulders tight, hair pulled back neatly, clothes chosen too carefully for someone just staying home. "You didn't have to come all the way out here," she said, already moving around the kitchen like she needed to stay busy. "I know," I replied. "I wanted to." I didn't mention the call. Not yet. I watched instead. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for a glass. Silence tells more truth than questions sometimes. On the counter beside her sat a single sheet of paper. Clean, simple, nothing dramatic. Just a printed reminder with bold text at the top. "Dinner, 7 tonight. Family meeting." That was all it said. No details. Just enough to make it feel official. Elise noticed me glance at it and shifted her body slightly, trying to block my view. Too late. But I had already read enough. I picked up my phone like I was checking a message and angled it briefly toward the counter, snapping a quick photo before she turned back around. One small action. Quiet, necessary. "What's the dinner about?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Just family stuff," she said quickly. "Nothing big." Her answer came too fast. Elise had never been a vague person. She believed in clarity, in open conversations. Watching her dodge a simple question felt like watching someone slowly disappear inside a role she didn't choose. Before I could say anything else, a deeper voice drifted in from behind us. "She's overthinking it," Adrian said. I hadn't heard him enter the room. That was his habit. Moving quietly, observing before speaking. He leaned against the doorway with a relaxed smile that didn't sit right on his face. Then his eyes moved from me to Elise, lingering just long enough to remind her he was watching. "Hi, Bernice," he added casually, like nothing in the air had weight. "Adrian," I replied, keeping my voice even. Elise's shoulders tightened when he stepped closer. She didn't look at him. Instead, she focused on rearranging the cups on the counter, as if precision could protect her from whatever mood he carried. He glanced at the paper, then at her. "You told her already?" he asked. "No," Elise said quickly. The word came out sharper than she intended, and for a split second, irritation flickered across his face. Then he smiled again. That same easy smile he used whenever he wanted to look reasonable. "I just don't want things getting complicated tonight," he said lightly, though his eyes stayed fixed on her. "We all want peace, right?" Peace. And the word hung in the air like a warning. Elise nodded, almost automatically. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The apology I heard earlier wasn't about kindness or reconciliation. It was about avoiding punishment. Signing wasn't about agreement. It was about control. Adrian took another step forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound private, even though I stood right there. "If you embarrass my mother again," he said quietly to Elise, "you'll regret it." The words landed softly, but their meaning wasn't soft at all. Elise flinched, barely noticeable, just a tightening around her eyes. But I saw it, and in that small reaction, everything I had heard at the door fell into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was pressure. I kept my face calm, refusing to give Adrian the reaction he might have been waiting for. Inside, though, something shifted. The dinner reminder on the counter stopped looking like a simple invitation. It looked like a stage being set, and for the first time since I stepped onto that porch, I felt certain of one thing. Tonight wasn't going to be a normal family dinner. The sound came sharp and sudden, a short vibration against the counter. Elise's phone lit up beside the sink, and she flinched so quickly she almost dropped the glass in her hand. It wasn't dramatic, just a small reaction. But I knew my daughter well enough to recognize when her body moved before she could pretend everything was fine. She reached for the phone, glanced at the screen, then turned it face down as if that could hide whatever it said. "You okay?" I asked gently. "Oh, I'm fine," she replied too fast, her voice light but strained. She forced a small smile and picked up the bag I brought, busying herself with unpacking it like she needed something to do with her hands. "You didn't have to come all this way, Mom. Really." I leaned against the edge of the counter, watching her move. The way she avoided my eyes, the way her shoulders stayed tight even when she laughed at nothing. Silence stretched between us, heavy but not empty. I waited. Elise had always been the kind of person who spoke when she felt safe enough to do it. Another vibration hit the phone. She didn't pick it up this time. She just stared at it, jaw tightening. "Elise," I said softly, "what's going on?" "Nothing," she said again, quieter now. "It's just planning stuff for tonight." Her answer didn't match her posture, and she looked like someone waiting for a verdict, not a dinner invitation. I didn't push immediately. I let the silence do the work the way I learned years ago. Ask once, then give space. People fill silence with truth when they're ready. She sighed, long and tired, and finally met my eyes. "They just want things to run smoothly," she said. "Who's they?" She hesitated. "Adrian's mom, Veronica." The name settled heavily in the room. I nodded slowly. "And the signing you mentioned on the phone?" Her lips pressed together. For a moment, I thought she would shut down again. Then her shoulders dropped slightly like she was too tired to keep pretending. "It's not a big deal," she said. "Months ago, I signed paperwork to join the family business. They said it would make me officially part of everything. Investments, decisions, all of that." "Did you read it?" I asked. "Yes," she said quickly, then paused. "Well, most of it." Something in the way she said it made my stomach tighten. "Do you have a copy?" I asked. She shook her head. "Veronica's lawyer keeps the originals. Adrian said there wasn't any need for me to hold on to paperwork since it's all handled already. Handled? The word sounded heavier than it should have. I stayed calm, careful not to let my concern turn into accusation. And the person who witnessed your signature, someone you knew? She hesitated again. No, some notary they brought in. I didn't really talk to him. He just checked my ID and signed. A small chill ran through me. Signing documents with strangers watching felt less like partnership and more like procedure, like something designed to look official even if it wasn't fully understood. The phone buzzed again. Elise closed her eyes briefly before picking it up this time. She read the message silently, then locked the screen and placed it farther away from herself, as if distance could make the pressure fade. "What did it say?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "Just a reminder." Her voice cracked on the last word. I reached out and touched her hand gently. "Elise, you don't have to carry this alone." For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Instead, she laughed, a soft, tired sound that didn't belong to her usual confidence. "It's not like that," she said. "They're just organized. Veronica likes things structured." "And Adrian?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to the counter. "They handle most of the finances now," she admitted finally. "It's easier that way. They set limits on certain accounts, so I don't have to think about it." "Limits?" I repeated carefully. She nodded. "It's temporary, just until everything is finalized. My cards still work. Mostly. But big transfers go through them first. It's just management." Management. Another word that sounded harmless until you looked at it too closely. I kept my tone neutral. "And you're comfortable with that?" She swallowed, eyes shining with something she didn't want to name. "It keeps things calm," she said quietly. The phrase landed harder than any confession could have. Calm at the cost of control. The phone buzzed again. Longer this time. She glanced at it, then at me as if deciding whether to speak. Finally, she picked it up and typed a quick reply, and her hands shook slightly. "They just want tonight to go smoothly," she said again, almost like she was convincing herself. "And if it doesn't?" I asked gently. Her breath caught. She looked toward the hallway where Adrian had disappeared earlier, making sure he wasn't listening. "They think I embarrassed Veronica last week," she whispered. "I disagreed with something she said in front of people. It wasn't even an argument, but she called it disrespect." I waited. Elise's voice dropped even lower. "They said signing the new document tonight would show I'm committed." Committed. The word sounded less like partnership and more like obedience. She wrapped her arms around herself, eyes fixed on the floor. "If I don't sign the next one," she began, then stopped. "What happens?" I asked, softly. Her voice barely rose above a breath. "When I might lose everything." I should have left after that conversation in Elise's kitchen, but something in me needed to see more before I decided what kind of storm we were walking into. A few days later, Veronica hosted a small afternoon gathering at her house. Nothing grand, just close family and two couples she described as people who matter. Elise asked me to come along. She said it casually, but I heard the quiet request underneath it. So I went. Veronica's living room looked like a magazine page. Pale furniture, glass tables, everything placed with intention. People spoke in low voices, smiling politely while measuring one another with quick glances. Elise stood beside Adrian, hands folded neatly, posture perfect in a way that didn't feel natural. She wasn't relaxed. She looked rehearsed. The moment that stayed with me happened over something small. One of the guests asked Elise about a project she had worked on years ago, something she used to speak about with pride. Elise answered honestly, explaining how she handled a difficult client and made a decision that saved time and money. She wasn't bragging. She was simply telling her story. Veronica laughed softly. Not loud enough to draw attention, just enough to cut through Elise's words. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to adjust the collar of Elise's blouse like she was fixing a child before a photo. "You always rush the ending. Let me explain it properly." The room went quiet in that polite way people get when they sense tension but don't want to name it. Veronica retold Elise's story as if she had been there, correcting details that didn't need correcting, then turning Elise's achievement into something that sounded accidental. Her smile never dropped. Her voice stayed sweet. Elise nodded along, apologizing under her breath even though she hadn't said anything wrong. I watched Adrian during all of this. He leaned back against the couch, arms folded, a small amused smile playing at the corner of his mouth. When one of the guests chuckled at Veronica's version of the story, he joined in. Not loudly, just enough to signal agreement. That small laugh told me everything about how normal this behavior had become inside their family. Elise tried to move the conversation forward, but Veronica wasn't finished. She placed a hand lightly on Elise's shoulder, guiding her back toward the center of the room. "We're working on her," she said to the guests with a gentle smile. "She's a wonderful girl. It just needs refinement." The word hung in the air. Refinement. Elise's face flushed. "I'm sorry if I—" "There's nothing to be sorry for," Veronica interrupted, still smiling. "It's a process. Training takes time." Training. I felt something tighten in my chest. People chuckled politely, assuming it was a joke. Elise laughed too, though her eyes didn't match the sound coming out of her mouth. She looked smaller standing there, like she was trying to shrink into whatever shape Veronica found acceptable. A few minutes later, while the guests moved toward the dining area, I overheard Veronica speaking quietly to Adrian near the doorway. "We'll finish this at dinner," she said, her voice calm but firm. Adrian nodded once. No argument, no hesitation. The phrase stayed with me longer than anything else that afternoon. Finish this. And as if Elise were a task waiting to be completed. When the gathering started to wind down, Veronica approached me near the hallway, her smile still perfectly in place. Up close, her eyes were colder than her voice. "You must be proud," she said lightly. "Elise has potential. She just needs structure." I didn't answer immediately. I watched her, measuring the distance between what she said and what she meant. "She's strong," I replied calmly. Veronica tilted her head, studying me as if she were deciding how honest to be. Then she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping just enough that no one else could hear. "You raised her soft," she said. "But don't worry, we'll fix that." She straightened before I could respond, her smile returning as if nothing had been said at all. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words settle into something sharper than irritation. Soft wasn't an insult in my world. Soft meant kind, patient, human. But the way Veronica said it made it sound like weakness, something she intended to correct. And as I watched Elise across the room, laughing politely while adjusting a tray for guests who barely acknowledged her, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. This wasn't just a family adjusting to new dynamics. It was a system, and Elise was being shaped inside it, one correction at a time. The afternoon after Veronica's gathering, Elise stopped by my place with one of her friends, a woman named Mariah I had met a few times before. Mariah had always been warm, the kind of person who filled quiet spaces with easy conversation. Then she walked into my living room carrying a small plant and talking about traffic like nothing in the world felt heavy. Elise looked tired. She sat on the edge of the couch instead of sinking into it the way she used to, her back straight, eyes flicking toward her phone every few minutes. Mariah chatted about work and weekend plans, laughing easily until she mentioned something that made the air shift without warning. "I thought you already knew about the new property," Mariah said casually, reaching for her drink. Elise froze. It wasn't dramatic, just a small pause, her hand stopping halfway to the table, her eyes darting toward me before snapping back to Mariah. The room felt suddenly smaller. "What property?" I asked, keeping my voice light. Mariah blinked, confused. "Oh, I just assumed she told you. Adrian mentioned it last week when we ran into him. Something about a new house tied to the family business." Elise laughed too quickly. "It's nothing," she said, waving her hand as if the subject bored her. "Just investment stuff. You know how they talk." Her tone felt forced. Mariah noticed too because she immediately started apologizing. "I didn't mean to bring it up," she said. "I just thought—" "It's fine," Elise cut in, standing abruptly. "Mom, did you want more tea? I'll make some." She moved toward the kitchen before either of us could respond. The sudden change of subject wasn't subtle. It was panic dressed up as politeness. Mariah leaned closer to me once Elise stepped out of the room. "Did I say something wrong?" she whispered. I shook my head slowly, though inside I felt a familiar cold settle under my ribs. "No," I said gently. "You just told me something I didn't know." Mariah frowned, glancing toward the kitchen. "Adrian sounded excited about it," she added quietly. "He said it would put everything under one roof. I thought that meant they were moving." Moving. The word echoed louder than it should have. Elise had never mentioned a new house. Not once. She had always included me in decisions that big, even when she didn't need my approval. When she returned with the tea, her smile looked rehearsed. She sat down again but avoided meeting my eyes. Mariah quickly shifted the conversation to safer topics, but the moment had already carved a crack through my thoughts. After Mariah left, the silence between Elise and me stretched long enough to feel intentional. "What property was she talking about?" I asked finally. Annalise kept her gaze on her hands. "Just an investment. Adrian and Veronica handle most of that stuff. It's not a big deal." "Is it in your name?" I asked. She hesitated. "I think so, partly. I'm not really sure how they structured it." The answer didn't sound like Elise, not the daughter who used to read contracts twice before signing anything. Something about this arrangement felt less like partnership and more like placement. "I didn't think it mattered," she added quickly, as if trying to close the conversation before it grew teeth. "It's just business." I nodded, but inside, something refused to settle. Elise had never hidden things from me without reason. The fact that her friend knew about a new property before I did felt like a lie, not because she meant to deceive me, but because she was being kept in the dark herself. Later that evening, after she left, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I didn't go digging for secrets or anything dramatic, just a simple search, the kind anyone can do when curiosity turns into concern. Public records, property filings, basic information. It didn't take long. A recent listing appeared connected to a limited company tied to Veronica's family name. The document was short, full of legal language I had to read twice, but one line stood out clearly: a pending transfer connected to a residential property. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse slowing into something focused. The filing wasn't finalized yet, just pending. But the address listed at the bottom felt familiar. I read it once, then again, my breath catching slightly. When it matched the location printed on the reminder I photographed from Elise's kitchen counter, the place where the family dinner was scheduled to happen. For a moment, I sat perfectly still, staring at the screen as pieces began sliding into place. A new property Elise didn't choose. Paperwork she didn't fully understand. A dinner described as a signing, and now a public record tying everything to Veronica's circle. I closed the laptop slowly, the quiet of my house pressing in around me. Whatever was waiting at that dinner wasn't just a conversation. It was a decision already moving forward without her. Adrian had never come to my house alone before. That was the first thing that felt wrong when I opened the door and saw him standing there with that easy, practiced smile. He held nothing in his hands, no flowers, no excuse that made sense. Just a calm posture, like he belonged exactly where he was. "Bernice," he said, warm and polite, I was in the area, thought I should stop by. People say small things like that all the time, but something in his tone felt measured, like every word had been rehearsed. I stepped aside and let him in anyway. I wasn't afraid of him, but I was paying attention now in a way I hadn't before. He walked slowly through my living room, glancing at the photos on the wall. Elise as a child, Elise at graduation, Elise laughing with her friends. His eyes lingered just long enough to make me feel like he was collecting information, not memories. "I appreciate how much you care about her," he said, settling into a chair without being invited. "Family support is important." The sentence sounded respectful, but it landed heavy. "But what brings you here, Adrian?" I asked calmly. He smiled wider, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Just checking in. Elise mentioned you two had a long talk the other day." I hadn't told him that. My face stayed neutral. "We always talk." "Of course," he said quickly. "I just want to make sure there's no confusion going into tonight. Veronica likes things smooth." There it was, the real reason for his visit. Not respect, not courtesy, control. He asked small questions disguised as conversation. Had Elise seemed stressed? Did she mention any concerns? What did I think about family unity? Each question circled the same center point. How much did I know? I gave him nothing he could use. Simple answers, calm tone. He watched me carefully, the smile never quite leaving his face. "You know," he said after a moment, lowering his voice, "Elise is still learning how our family works. She grew up differently, more relaxed." Relaxed? The word sounded like an accusation. "She's strong," I replied. He nodded, but the agreement didn't reach his eyes. "She just needs guidance," he said. "Sometimes too many voices make things harder for her." The message sat between us without needing to be said outright. Don't interfere. I folded my hands quietly in my lap. "She's my daughter," I said. "She doesn't get confused by conversation." He chuckled softly, that same small laugh I'd heard before, the one that sounded harmless until you listened closely. "I'm sure you mean well," he said, "but don't confuse her. She's learning." The way he said learning made my skin prickle. It wasn't encouragement. It sounded like training, like correction. He leaned back, or studying me as if waiting for a reaction. When I didn't give him one, he shifted tactics. "You heard about the property already, right?" he asked casually. I hadn't mentioned that to him, not once. My silence must have answered something for him, because his smile sharpened slightly. "Elise worries too much sometimes," he continued. "She talks things through a lot, late at night mostly. It helps when we can keep conversations consistent." Late at night. My chest tightened. He was referencing calls she had with me, details I had never shared with him directly. The realization slid into place quietly but firmly. He wasn't guessing. He knew more than he should have known. "I'm not sure what you're implying," I said evenly. "Oh, nothing," he replied quickly. "Just that Veronica has ways of keeping things balanced when someone starts drifting. Discipline is part of growth." Discipline. The word felt heavier than the smile he wore while saying it. He stood up a moment later, smoothing the front of his jacket like the conversation had been pleasant and harmless. "I should go," he said. "We'll see you tonight." At the door, he paused and turned back to me. "Bernice," he added, voice low, "we all want Elise to succeed. Just make sure she walks into dinner with the right mindset." Then he left. The house felt quieter after the door closed behind him, but not peaceful. I stood there for a long moment, replaying every word he had said. The careful questions, the things he knew without being told, the way he dressed warnings as kindness. My phone rang less than 5 minutes later. When Elise's name lit up the screen, I answered immediately. "Elise!" Her breathing came fast through the line, uneven and raw. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. He knows we talked. Elise came over that evening without warning. She didn't knock the way she usually did, 2 quick taps and a laugh before I even reached the door. This time the knock was soft, almost careful. When I opened it, she stood there holding her purse tightly against her side, eyes tired, smile thin. "Can I come in?" she asked. "You never have to ask," I said, stepping aside. She walked past me slowly, heading straight to the kitchen like she needed something familiar to hold on to. I watched her from behind, noticing the way she kept her head slightly turned away. When she finally looked up, the light caught the side of her face, just enough for me to see the faint discoloration along her cheekbone. My breath slowed. "What happened?" I asked gently. She touched her face automatically, then dropped her hand like she hadn't meant to draw attention to it. "Nothing," she said quickly. "I bumped into the cabinet earlier. I wasn't paying attention." The explanation came too fast, too rehearsed. "Elise," I said quietly. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice wavered. "It's not a big deal. I was just clumsy." She turned away, busying herself with opening the fridge even though she hadn't said she was hungry. And the story shifted as she spoke. First it was a cabinet, then a door, then she laughed and said she couldn't even remember exactly how it happened. That was when I stopped asking for details, not because I believed her, because I understood that pushing her to confess something she wasn't ready to name would only make her retreat further. Instead, I placed a cup of tea in front of her and sat across from her at the table. We spoke about small things at first, work, errands, nothing important, until her breathing finally slowed. "Mom," she said softly, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "Do you ever feel like everything is already decided before you even walk into a room?" The question hung between us. "Yes," I said, "and I've learned that when something feels decided, it usually means someone else is trying to write your part for you." She didn't answer. She just nodded slightly like she recognized the truth, but didn't know what to do with it yet. That night, after she left, I made a decision that didn't feel dramatic or brave. It felt necessary. I wasn't going to confront Adrian. I wasn't going to argue with Veronica. I was going to prepare quietly. The next morning, I met with someone I trusted, a legal professional who had handled a few matters for our family years ago. I didn't walk into that office with accusations or plans for revenge. I walked in with questions. "What do you do?" I asked. "When someone signs something they don't fully understand, because they feel pressured to keep the peace." He listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing me. When I finished, then he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "If there's coercion tied to a contract," he said calmly, "timing matters, and witnesses matter even more." The words landed heavier than I expected. "I'm not trying to start a fight," I said quickly. "I just want to understand what options exist if things get worse." He nodded. "Preparation isn't war, Bernice. It's protection." We spoke for nearly an hour, about patterns, about documentation, about how small details can matter later, even if they seem insignificant now. He didn't promise outcomes. He didn't dramatize anything. He just explained what steps people often wish they had taken sooner. Before I left, he handed me a simple card with a phone number written clearly across it. "You don't need to use this unless you feel something has crossed a line," he said. "So if that moment ever comes, call and say only this: 'It happened.' That tells me enough to know you're ready to move forward." I slipped the card into my purse, hoping I would never need it. When Elise came back to my house later that day to pick up something she had forgotten, she looked more composed. Makeup covering the faint bruise, posture straight, smile practiced. But the tension hadn't left her eyes. Her phone buzzed while she stood near the door. She glanced at the screen, then handed it to me without speaking. The message was short. "Wear something nice to dinner. Don't embarrass us." No greeting, no warmth, just instruction. Elise exhaled slowly, like she had expected it. They just want things to look good tonight, she said quietly, though her voice carried more exhaustion than belief. I nodded, my hand resting lightly over my purse where the card waited, untouched. Dinner was only hours away, and for the first time, I felt the shape of a moment approaching, one I had been quietly preparing for without fully admitting it to myself. Elise didn't say a word during the drive. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, fingers locked together so tightly the knuckles turned pale. I kept my eyes on the road, pretending not to notice how often she swallowed, how her breathing came in short, shallow bursts like she was bracing herself for impact. Halfway there, she suddenly leaned forward. "Pull over," she whispered. I didn't ask questions. I turned into the nearest parking lot and stopped the car just as she pushed the door open and stepped out. She barely made it to the curb before she vomited, one hand gripping the side of the car like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I walked over slowly, resting my palm against her back. I didn't rush her. I didn't fill the air with worry. She hated being fussed over when she felt exposed. "I'm okay," she said after a moment, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, even though her voice trembled. "It's just nerves." I handed her a napkin from the glove compartment. "You don't have to go," I said quietly. She shook her head immediately. "If I don't show up, it'll be worse." That sentence told me more than anything else. We drove the rest of the way in silence. Veronica's house looked different that evening. The lights were brighter, the front door wide open as if expecting an audience. Cars lined the street in neat rows. When we stepped inside, the air smelled like expensive perfume and polished wood. Everything arranged too perfectly, like a ceremony instead of a dinner. Guests stood in small clusters, glasses in hand, voices low and controlled. Veronica moved through the room like she owned not just the space, but everyone in it. Her smile was flawless when she greeted us, arms open, voice warm enough to fool anyone who didn't know her well. "Bernice," she said sweetly. "Elise, I'm so glad you came." Her eyes lingered on Elise's face for a second too long, scanning for something only she could see. Then she guided us toward the dining area with a light touch on Elise's shoulder that looked affectionate from a distance, but felt like direction. The table was already set. Elise's place sat directly across from Veronica's, and in front of her lay a thin folder, dark, simple, closed carefully like it held something important. It didn't look heavy, but it felt like the heaviest thing in the room. Elise stopped walking. Her breath caught so quietly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching her closely. She glanced at me, then at the folder, then back at Veronica, who stood smiling as if everything was perfectly normal. "Let's not make this tense," Veronica said lightly to the guests nearby. "Tonight is about clarity." The word clarity landed wrong. Adrian appeared beside Elise, placing a hand at the small of her back. "Relax," he murmured. "It's just paperwork." Elise nodded, but I felt the tension radiating off her like heat. As people settled into their seats, Veronica pulled Elise aside near the hallway, her smile still intact for anyone watching. I followed slowly, keeping enough distance to look casual while staying close enough to hear. "You know why we're here," Veronica said softly. Elise's voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not signing tonight." The words surprised even me. Veronica's smile tightened, though she didn't let it disappear. "Don't be dramatic." "It gives up my claim," Elise continued quietly. "You said it was restructuring, but it removes me completely. I read it this time." There it was, the truth slipping into the open. My fingers moved instinctively to my purse. I pulled my phone halfway out and pressed record, keeping it hidden against the fabric so it looked like nothing more than a nervous habit. The room was loud enough to mask the small movement. I didn't know if I would ever need the audio, but I knew I needed to be ready. Veronica tilted her head. "They're studying Elise the way someone studies a problem they expect to solve quickly." "You're misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "We're protecting the family." "I am the family," Elise replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a brief second, Veronica's eyes hardened, the mask slipping just enough for me to see what lived underneath. She straightened, smoothing her dress, smile returning as guests drifted closer. "If you won't cooperate privately," she said softly, leaning closer so only we could hear, "then we'll handle this another way." Elise didn't move. Veronica's lips curved upward, calm and confident. "Then we'll teach you in front of everyone." The first slap landed so fast the room didn't react right away. It wasn't loud the way people imagine in movies, and it was sharp. A dry crack that cut through conversation and left a silence behind it that felt heavier than noise. For a second, nobody moved. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Forks hovered over plates. Even the music in the background felt like it shrank. Elise's head turned slightly from the impact. She didn't cry out. She just blinked, stunned, like her body hadn't decided yet whether this was real. Veronica stood close to her, posture perfect, smile still in place for anyone watching from a distance. "That's for interrupting me," she said calmly. Before Elise could respond, the second slap came. Slower, more deliberate. Not rage, control, the kind meant to establish authority without raising a voice. My hands tightened at my sides, but I didn't rush forward. Something in me went cold and focused, and the way it does when you know reacting too fast will only make things worse. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes flicking toward Adrian as if waiting for him to step in. He didn't. He leaned back slightly, arms crossed, watching like this was a normal correction. And then he laughed, a soft, careless sound that felt louder than the slap itself. "That'll help you learn," he said. The words settled into the room like permission. Elise tried to step away, but Veronica reached out again, pushing her back toward the table with a firm shove that wasn't dramatic enough to look violent from across the room, just forceful enough to remind her where she stood. "You signed before," Veronica said quietly, voice smooth. "You'll sign again." That sentence snapped something into clarity for me. This wasn't anger, and it was a performance. Pressure designed to break her resistance in front of witnesses. Nobody intervened, not the guests, not Adrian, not even the people who looked uncomfortable enough to leave. They sat frozen, pretending this was a misunderstanding they didn't need to touch. I stepped forward just enough to reach Elise's side, placing a steady hand on her arm. Her skin felt cold. "Bernice," Veronica said sweetly, as if greeting me at a garden party, "this doesn't concern you." I didn't answer. Instead, I turned calmly and walked toward the hallway, every step measured. My heart beat slowly, evenly, like it had already decided what came next. My hand slid into my purse, fingers brushing against the small card I had saved for a day I prayed wouldn't come. I pulled out my phone. One call. When the line connected, I spoke quietly, and my voice steady. It happened. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The person on the other end paused just long enough to acknowledge the words, then said they were on their way. I returned to the dining room without urgency. Veronica had resumed her calm posture, speaking to guests as if nothing significant had occurred. Elise stood still beside her chair, eyes fixed on the floor, breath shallow but controlled. Minutes passed. Then the front door opened. The shift in the room was immediate. Conversations faded. Chairs creaked as people turned to look. Two individuals stepped inside, a civil investigator and the attorney I had met days earlier. Their presence changed the atmosphere more than any raised voice could have. Veronica's smile faltered for the first time. Adrian straightened, see confusion flickering across his face before he masked it with irritation. The investigator approached slowly, scanning the room, eyes settling briefly on Elise's cheek. He spoke calmly, professionally, as if entering a space where emotions didn't dictate his actions. "We received a call," he said. "We need to ask a few questions." Veronica opened her mouth to object, but the attorney spoke first, voice firm yet controlled, referencing concerns about coercion and the need to document events while witnesses were present. The words were precise, grounded, impossible to dismiss as drama. Elise didn't move. She looked at me instead, not with fear, but with something closer to relief, like the ground beneath her had finally stopped shifting. The investigator stepped closer to her, his tone gentle but direct. "Ma'am," he said, "do you want to make a statement right now?" The room changed faster than I expected. 1 minute, Veronica stood tall, controlled, certain everyone would follow her lead. The next, her voice softened into something almost fragile, her hand rising gently toward Elise's shoulder, like she was the one offering comfort. "Oh my goodness," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Elise, you're shaking. I told you not to get yourself worked up like this." The shift was so smooth it would have fooled anyone who hadn't watched the slaps land. "She's been under a lot of stress," Veronica continued, turning toward the investigator with a sympathetic smile. "Sometimes she misunderstands situations when she's emotional. Misunderstands. The words were chosen carefully. Not accusations, just enough to plant doubt." Adrian stepped forward next, his expression suddenly softer, voice calm and controlled. "We didn't expect this to escalate," he said, offering his hand to the investigator like this was a professional meeting instead of a family dinner gone wrong. "My wife has been overwhelmed lately. We're just trying to help her stay grounded." He sounded reasonable, measured, almost concerned. That was the real danger. The investigator listened without interrupting, his eyes moving from Adrian to Veronica to Elise's cheek, where the faint redness hadn't fully faded yet. He didn't argue. He simply observed. I felt my phone heavy in my hand, the recording still running quietly from earlier. Veronica continued, lowering her voice as if confiding something delicate. "She forgets details sometimes," she added. "We worry about her. That's all." I stepped forward then. "Before anyone rewrites what just happened," I said calmly, "you should hear the full conversation." I held out my phone and stopped the recording. The audio played softly. Veronica's voice clear, Elise refusing to sign, the calm threat about teaching her in front of everyone. The room went still as the words echoed back through the speakers. Adrian's smile tightened. Veronica's eyes flickered toward me, sharp for just a second before she regained composure. I handed the investigator my phone along with the photo I had taken days earlier, the reminder from Elise's counter with the dinner time and the words, "family meeting." No drama, just facts. The investigator nodded once, making notes while the attorney beside him spoke quietly about preserving context and witness statements. Nothing loud, nothing theatrical, just steady, procedural language that made it harder for anyone to dismiss the moment as a misunderstanding. A woman near the end of the table shifted uncomfortably. She'd been silent all evening, one of Veronica's guests, elegant and distant. She glanced at Elise, then at Veronica, and finally at the investigator. "This isn't the first time," she said quietly. The words slipped out like something she hadn't meant to say aloud. Veronica's head turned sharply toward her. "I think you're mistaken," she replied, her voice still polite but edged with warning. The guest hesitated, then lowered her gaze. But the damage was already done. The room felt different now. Less like an audience, more like witnesses. The investigator stepped closer to Elise, asking gentle questions while documenting what he saw. He noted the redness along her cheekbone, the tension in her posture, the way her hands trembled slightly even when she tried to steady them. Names were taken. Guests identified themselves reluctantly, some avoiding eye contact, others whispering explanations that sounded more like excuses. Adrian tried again to smooth things over. "We don't want to make this bigger than it is," he said with a calm smile. "Families argue, that's normal." The attorney beside me spoke before I could. "Physical force tied to a contractual dispute isn't normal," he said evenly. Silence followed. For the first time that evening, Veronica's composure cracked just enough to show frustration beneath it. She turned toward Elise, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "We're only trying to help you," she said. "You're overreacting." But Elise didn't answer, and she stood beside me, eyes clearer than they had been all night. The investigator finished writing and stepped back slightly, exchanging a look with the attorney. Then the attorney turned to me, his voice low but urgent. "We need the signed documents," he said. "Tonight, before they disappear." The drive home felt longer than it should have. Elise sat quietly beside me, staring straight ahead, one hand pressed against her cheek like she was trying to hold herself together without saying anything. The adrenaline from the dinner hadn't worn off yet. Neither had the silence that followed us out of Veronica's house. Guests watching, whispers trailing behind us, Adrian standing stiff near the doorway as the investigator finished his notes. When we reached my driveway, Elise exhaled slowly, like she had been holding her breath the entire ride. She stepped inside ahead of me and dropped her purse onto the kitchen table. "I need to get those documents," she said, her voice steadier now. "He said they were in my bag." She opened the zipper quickly, fingers moving faster than her thoughts. Papers shifted, a notebook slid out, lipstick, keys, but no folder. She froze. "It was right here," she whispered, digging deeper, pulling everything out onto the table. "I brought it. I remember holding it." I watched her movements become sharper, more frantic. She checked every compartment twice, then a third time, as if the papers might magically appear if she searched hard enough. "They took it," she said finally, her voice thin. "I never even had copies." The realization landed heavy between us. "Okay," I said calmly. "We'll request them." She nodded, but her hands kept moving, on searching for something she knew wasn't there anymore. "I'll pull it from my email," she said quickly, grabbing her laptop from her bag. She opened it and typed fast, shoulders tense. The screen lit her face as she entered her password. "Invalid." She frowned and tried again, slower this time. "Invalid." Her breathing hitched. "That's not right." She clicked through the recovery page, typing her phone number, waiting for a code that never came. Her expression shifted from confusion to something darker. "They changed it," she whispered. I felt the room grow smaller. She tried another account, then another, each one rejecting her access. The control she thought was temporary suddenly felt permanent. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, then turned it toward me without speaking. A message from Adrian. "Come back alone and we'll fix it." No apology. No explanation. Just instruction. Elise's mouth tightened. "He thinks I'll walk back in like nothing happened." "Not tonight," I said quietly. She nodded, but the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. A few minutes later, her phone chimed again. This time, a notification from her banking app. She tapped it absent-mindedly, expecting nothing serious, then frowned. "My card declined?" she said, confused. "I didn't even use it." She tried another card through the app. Same message, access restricted. She laughed once, a short, hollow sound. "They froze me," she said. "Or maybe they just turned me off." The escalation felt deliberate. What quiet pressure disguised as financial management. I picked up my phone and called the attorney. I didn't dramatize anything. I simply explained what had happened. The missing folder, the locked email, the message from Adrian. His tone sharpened immediately. "Do not return there," he said. "I'm sending a preservation notice and a formal request for copies right now. If documents were removed after tonight's incident, that matters." He spoke quickly, outlining the next steps in language that felt steady enough to hold on to. Letters sent, timestamps noted, requests logged, so nothing could quietly disappear. Elise sat at the table, staring at her phone as if waiting for it to change its mind. Another notification appeared, this time from her bank. Her eyes widened. "There's a transfer scheduled," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Tomorrow morning." The amount wasn't small. The room fell silent again, heavier than before. I looked at her, then back at the screen, feeling the weight of the night settle into something sharper than fear, because whatever Veronica and Adrian planned next, it was already moving forward. The bank opened early, but we were already sitting in the parking lot when the doors unlocked. Elise hadn't slept. I could see it in the way she held her coffee. Steady hands, tired eyes, a kind of quiet determination that didn't need words. The alert about the scheduled transfer still sat on her phone screen like a countdown neither of us could ignore. Inside, everything felt too calm. Soft lighting, polite smiles, the quiet rhythm of people waiting their turn, as if nothing serious ever happened in a place built on numbers. We met with a senior banker in a small office near the back. He greeted Elise warmly at first, the kind of professional friendliness that comes from long-term clients, but his expression shifted when she explained why we were there. "I need to stop a transfer," she said, sliding her phone across the desk, "and I need to understand why my access changed overnight." He listened carefully, typing as she spoke. Then he paused, frowning slightly at the screen. "Your authorization level was modified," he said slowly. Elise blinked. "Modified how?" He turned the monitor slightly so she could see. "A management designation was added to the account. Someone listed as primary operator for transactions above a certain amount." My stomach tightened. "I never approved that," Elise said, her voice calm but firm. The banker hesitated, scrolling through digital records. "There's documentation here stating you authorized a manager when you joined the family business structure." The phrase landed heavy. The business wasn't partnership, it was containment. "Who's listed as manager?" I asked quietly. He read the name aloud, someone neither of us recognized immediately. But when Elise pulled up an old email thread and compared it to a contact list tied to Veronica's events, the connection became clear. The manager traced back to Veronica's circle, someone who attended gatherings, someone who smiled politely but never spoke directly to us. "They made it look like I agreed to this," Elise said, her voice low. The banker nodded carefully. "The signature attached to the authorization references a document you signed months ago." He opened a scanned file on the screen. Then Elise leaned forward, studying the page. Her signature sat neatly at the bottom. Real, unmistakable. But the language around it felt different from what she remembered. "This wasn't explained to me like this," she said. The banker clicked another tab. "The notary verification is included here." A name appeared beneath the stamp, one tied directly to the attorney Veronica's family had used for years. Elise exhaled slowly. He never spoke to me beyond checking my ID. The room grew quieter. "I'm not accusing anyone," the banker said carefully, "but when authorization levels change this quickly, especially after a dispute, we flag it." He typed a few notes into the system, then picked up the phone on his desk. "I'm opening an internal review," he said, speaking to someone on the other end in calm, professional tones. "Now, possible unauthorized management designation. Yes, client present. Yes, documentation concerns." He hung up and looked back at Elise. "Our fraud unit will examine the changes. For now, we can temporarily pause outgoing transfers until they confirm everything aligns with your intent." Elise nodded, relief flickering across her face for the first time since last night. I watched her shoulders drop slightly, the tension easing just enough to remind me how much pressure she had been carrying alone. "Is there anything else we should know?" I asked. The banker hesitated. He studied the screen again, scrolling through more records. His expression shifted, not alarmed, but thoughtful, like he was deciding how much to say at once. "There's another account connected to your profile," he said slowly. "Not the main one you use." Elise frowned. What do you mean?" He turned the monitor fully toward her. "It's under your name," he continued, "but structured differently. You don't appear to have direct access from your current login." The words settled heavily in the room. Elise's voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't open another account." The banker met her eyes, calm but serious. "That's why I need to ask," he said gently. "Do you know anything about a second account you don't have access to?" The banker turned the screen fully toward Elise, and I watched her expression shift from confusion to something colder. The moment a person realizes the ground beneath them isn't what they thought it was. "There," he said gently, pointing to a line under her profile. "This account is registered under your name, but it's linked to a different access structure." Elise leaned closer, scanning the details. Her fingers hovered over the edge of the desk, as if she needed something solid to hold on to. "I didn't open this," she said quietly. The banker nodded. "That's why we flagged it. The activity doesn't match your usual patterns." He clicked through a series of transactions. Numbers moved across the screen. Deposits, transfers, small amounts followed by larger ones. The pattern felt deliberate, controlled. I watched Elise's breathing change as she traced the movement of the money. "It's not just sitting there," she whispered. "It's being used." The banker highlighted a column labeled Memo Notes. Short phrases appeared beside several transfers. Coded language meant to look ordinary until you read it twice. Consulting fee, operational adjustment, training costs. Elise's hand trembled slightly. "Our training," she said under her breath. The word felt heavier than any amount of money. The transfers formed a trail that led toward an LLC name tied to Veronica's Circle, the same network we had started to recognize from the property filing and the management designation earlier that morning. "They're moving money through me," Elise said slowly, "using my name so it looks like I agreed to it." The realization hit her all at once. She pushed back from the desk, covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "They set me up," she said, her voice breaking. "They made it look like I'm part of something I don't even understand." I reached for her hand, steady but firm. She didn't pull away this time. The banker gave us a moment, then spoke carefully. "We're escalating this to our internal fraud team. They'll review whether these transactions align with your authorization history." He paused, choosing his words with precision. "If the account was structured without your informed consent, that matters." Outside the office window, people moved through the lobby, unaware of how heavy the air felt inside that small room. After we left the bank, we met the attorney again at his office. He listened quietly while Elise explained what we had seen: the second account, the manager designation, the memo lines that turned obedience into a billing category. When she finished, he folded his hands on the desk. "This changes leverage," he said calmly. Elise wiped her face, trying to regain composure. "Leverage how?" "You now have 3 elements moving together," he explained. "Evidence of physical force, a documentation suggesting coercion tied to contracts, and financial activity that may not reflect your informed intent. When those overlap, courts take it seriously." He didn't promise victory. He didn't dramatize outcomes. He just laid out the path in steady, grounded language. "We can request an injunction," he continued. "Freeze certain actions, challenge authorizations. But timing matters. We move carefully." Elise nodded, absorbing every word like it was oxygen. For the first time since last night, she didn't look defeated. She looked focused. Hurt. Yes, but no longer alone. My phone buzzed quietly on the table. A message notification flashed across Elise's screen at the same moment. Her face drained of color as she read it. "What is it?" I asked. She swallowed, turning the phone toward us. A legal notice, filed that morning. Adrian's name appeared at the top. A petition framed as concern, suggesting Elise's recent behavior showed instability and financial recklessness. The language sounded polite on the surface, but its purpose was clear: paint her as unreliable before she could challenge anything. He moved first, Elise whispered. The attorney exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as he read the document. That's not unusual, he said. When control starts slipping, people try to shape the narrative. The room fell quiet. Outside, traffic passed in steady rhythm, indifferent to what was unfolding inside. Elise looked at me, her eyes sharper than they had been all day. They're trying to make me look unfit, she said. And for the first time since this began, her voice didn't sound scared. It sounded ready. The envelope arrived the next morning. Winnie Elise stared at it for a long time before opening it, her fingers resting against the seal like she already knew what it contained. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching the way her shoulders squared before she finally slid a finger under the edge and unfolded the pages inside. Her name sat at the top. So did Adrian's. The language was polite, careful even, but every sentence felt like a quiet accusation. Concerns about emotional instability, claims of reckless financial decisions, a request for oversight framed as protection rather than control. They're trying to paint me as unreliable, she said softly, her voice steady in a way that surprised me, not angry, not crying, just clear. I watched her read every line without rushing. Each word seemed to harden something inside her instead of breaking it. Yeah, by the time she set the papers down, the confusion that had followed her for days had turned into focus. They moved first, she said, before any truth could reach anyone. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A message from a distant relative I hadn't heard from in months. Is Elise okay? Veronica said things got physical. Another message followed from someone else. We heard she lost control at dinner. The narrative had already started spreading. Veronica was moving faster than we were, not legally, but socially, shaping the story before facts could catch up. Elise's phone rang next. She glanced at the screen, then declined the call without answering. She's calling everyone, Elise said quietly, telling them I attacked her. The room felt smaller with every notification that came through. Whispers turned into messages. Messages turned into concern, disguised as curiosity. That was the moment Elise realized what she was truly facing. This isn't just about the marriage, she said slowly. It's a whole system. Reputation, money, relationships, all of it. She wasn't fighting Adrian alone. She was fighting a machine built to make her doubt herself. Later that afternoon, a woman named Diane, someone Elise had known through Veronica's gatherings, stopped by unexpectedly. She carried a warm smile and a tone that sounded sympathetic. I heard things got messy, Diane said gently, settling into a chair like she belonged there. I just want to help you think clearly. Elise looked at her for a long moment before answering. What kind of help? Advice, Diane replied smoothly. Sometimes families need someone neutral to translate misunderstandings. Her words sounded kind, but something about the way she asked questions felt off. Too specific, too strategic. What did the investigator say? What exactly did the lawyer advise? Are you planning to escalate legally? Elise's eyes flicked toward me, and I saw the realization land at the same moment it landed for me. This wasn't support. It was information gathering. Elise leaned back slightly, her tone shifting. Calm, polite, distant. Everything is being handled through counsel now, she said. Diane's smile tightened for a split second before returning. She asked a few more gentle questions, but Elise gave nothing away. After she left, the room felt lighter, like a door had closed behind something unwelcome. We document that, Elise said quietly. And she wasn't asking anymore. She was deciding. The attorney agreed. All communication moved through official channels. Messages were saved, calls logged. Every attempt to reach Elise directly became part of a growing record that told its own story. For the first time since the dinner, I saw my daughter step into a different version of herself. Not defensive, not afraid, but strategic. That evening, we sat in the attorney's office again, reviewing the petition Adrian had filed. He listened carefully as Elise described the calls from relatives, the visit from Diane, the way the narrative was shifting around her without her consent. "They're trying to control the frame before the facts land," he said calmly. Elise nodded. "Then we changed the timing." He studied her for a moment, then allowed himself a small, approving smile. "So tomorrow," he said, closing the file gently, "we go for emergency court orders." Courtrooms never look as dramatic as people imagine. No raised voices, no sudden speeches, just quiet rooms where decisions land with more weight than shouting ever could. Elise sat beside me, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes steady as the judge reviewed the request. The attorney spoke calmly, laying out what had happened. The incident at dinner, the pattern of pressure tied to contracts, the sudden changes to her financial access. Nothing exaggerated, just facts, arranged carefully so they spoke for themselves. When the ruling came, it was brief. A temporary protective order, restrictions on contact, immediate preservation of assets, a pause on certain transfers until the review finished. The words sounded technical, but I felt the shift instantly. For the first time since this began, someone outside that family had drawn a line. Elise exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders in a quiet wave. She didn't celebrate. She just nodded once, absorbing what it meant. Space, protection, time. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter, even though nothing had fully resolved yet. Our attorney explained the details in clear terms. "They can't pressure you directly," he said. "Financial activity tied to the disputed agreements is frozen for now. Any attempts to move assets will be reviewed." Rules had arrived, and rules changed everything. Later that afternoon, Veronica called my phone. Not Elise's, because she couldn't. Her voice sounded different now, less confident, more measured. "I think this has gone too far," she said. "Families shouldn't involve outsiders." I kept my tone calm. Then perhaps families shouldn't cross certain lines. She didn't argue. She simply ended the call, her silence louder than anything she could have said. Adrian reacted differently. Messages appeared on Elise's phone, attempts to sound concerned, then frustrated, then impatient. His lifestyle, the comfort he had built around access to her financial standing, suddenly felt unstable. The freeze on transfers wasn't just paperwork, it disrupted the rhythm he had come to depend on. "What am I supposed to do now?" one message read. Elise didn't respond. That evening, our attorney showed us something new, documents from the bank's compliance team. As they reviewed the accounts tied to Elise's name, they noticed a pattern that had gone unnoticed before. "The business structure is thinner than it looks," he said. "Several loans and guarantees rely heavily on Elise's credit profile." The realization hit quietly, but deeply. The family business wasn't as powerful as it pretended to be. It leaned on Elise's stability more than anyone had admitted. "That's why they needed her signature," I said. He nodded. "And why they pushed so hard." A third-party compliance officer contacted Elise later that night with follow-up questions. Routine, professional, but revealing. They wanted clarification on transactions, timelines, intent. Nothing accusatory, just careful inquiry that made it clear the situation was no longer contained inside one family. The machine that once felt untouchable was now being examined piece by piece. Elise sat across from me at the table, her posture calm, her eyes clear in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. "They thought I would fold," she said quietly. "You didn't," I replied. Her phone rang just as she finished speaking. It wasn't Adrian. It wasn't Veronica. It was the investigator. She answered, putting him on speaker so we could both hear. His voice stayed professional, but there was something new underneath it, a gravity that made me sit up straighter. "We've continued reviewing the statements and witness reports," he said, "and I need to let you know." We found another victim. The begging started quietly, not dramatic, not desperate in the way people expect, just messages that sounded softer than anything Veronica or Adrian had ever said before. Polite words wrapped around urgency. Adrian called first. Elise stared at the phone for a long moment before answering. His voice came through calm, almost affectionate, like none of the last few weeks had happened. "I've been thinking," he said gently. "Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we both did. Let's just reset. Come talk to me. No lawyers, just us." I watched Elise's face as she listened. For a second, I saw the memory of who she used to be. The woman who believed patience could fix anything, but it passed quickly. "You didn't ask for a reset when you filed against me?" she said quietly. He paused, then softened his tone even more. "I was scared. I thought you were slipping away. I miss you." Love bombing, polished and familiar. Elise didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply ended the call. Veronica tried a different approach. She came to my house alone, standing on the porch with the same composed posture she always carried. But something had shifted in her eyes. Less certainty, more calculation. "We can resolve this privately," she said once I opened the door. "No one needs to know more than they already do." Her gaze moved briefly past me, scanning the room as if measuring what she could still control. "What are you offering?" I asked. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Compensation, closure, whatever makes this stop escalating. Money, not apology, not accountability, just a transaction meant to silence consequences." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me so Elise wouldn't have to hear every word. "This isn't about punishment," I said calmly. "It's about protection." Veronica's smile tightened. "You don't understand how reputation works," she replied. Dragging this through formal channels hurts everyone." "It hurts systems built on silence," I said. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, as if realizing the conversation had reached its end. For the first time since I had known her, she didn't try to persuade me further. She simply turned and walked away. Inside, Elise sat at the table surrounded by documents, timelines, statements, legal drafts. The attorney had explained the next phase clearly: rescission steps tied to coercion, challenges to authorizations, continued enforcement of the protective order. Nothing flashy, just steady, procedural movement that slowly dismantled what had been built around her. The fraud review progressed quietly. Compliance teams asked questions. Witness statements were reviewed. The word spread through Veronica's social circle, not through gossip, but through absence. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations shifted. People who once laughed at her gatherings grew careful about where they stood. The biggest realization came one afternoon when Elise read through a deeper review of the business structure. "It was never a partnership," she said, her voice flat with understanding. "I wasn't meant to grow with them. I was meant to guarantee them." Her signature had been the bridge. Credit strength, legitimacy, stability. Everything had been framed as inclusion, but the structure told a different story. Recruitment disguised as marriage. She didn't cry when she said it. She just nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had finally fallen into place. The legal process didn't erase everything overnight. But documents were challenged, authorizations reviewed, assets separated carefully so her name no longer carried the weight of decisions she hadn't truly made. One evening, as we sat together in my living room, Elise's phone buzzed with another message from Adrian, longer this time, filled with apologies and memories, promises of change. She read it once, then locked the screen. "I don't hate him," she said quietly. "I just see him clearly now." That clarity felt stronger than anger. Weeks later, we crossed paths with Veronica and Adrian at a quiet event. Not a confrontation, just a moment where paths intersected again. Their smiles were thinner, Conversations around them felt cautious. The room knew more than it used to, even if no one spoke it aloud. Veronica approached me briefly, and her posture still proud, but her voice softer than before. "This could have stayed private," she said. I met her gaze calmly. "You didn't slap my daughter to teach her," I said. "You exposed yourselves, and I simply made sure the right people saw it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat, because revenge, the real kind, isn't loud. It's the moment someone loses the power they thought they owned and realizes it was never theirs to begin with.